It was just another Tuesday for billionaire Arthur Blackwood. It was just another Tuesday for billionaire Arthur Blackwood. The city hummed with its usual rhythm, a symphony of hurried footsteps, distant sirens, and the low growl of traffic. Arthur, cocooned in the plush leather of his chauffeured Maybach, barely noticed. His world was one of polished boardrooms and nine-figure deals, a universe away from the gritty pavement, just beyond his tinted windows. As his car purred to a stop at a red light, a woman approached. She was frail, her clothes worn, her face etched with a story of hardship he couldn't be bothered to read. She tapped gently on his window. Her name was Sarah. She was a mother of two, a former nurse who'd lost her job, her home, and was now fighting a losing battle against a mountain of medical bills. All she asked for was a little help. Anything to get a warm meal for her kids. Arthur glanced at her, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He'd seen countless people like her. To him, they were just part of the city's background noise. He gave a dismissive wave of his hand, and his driver, understanding the silent command, inched the car forward as the light turned green. Sarah was left standing on the corner, her reflection shrinking in the gleaming black paint of the departing luxury car. Arthur didn't give her a second thought. He had a gala to attend, a speech to give about philanthropy, and a reputation to uphold. That evening, Arthur stood on a brightly lit stage, bathed in the applause of the city's elite. He adjusted his tuxedo, a confident smile playing on his lips, as he spoke of corporate responsibility and the importance of giving back. His words were smooth, practiced, and utterly hollow. He spoke of building a better community while completely oblivious to the real community he had dismissed just hours earlier. As the applause died down and he mingled with his peers, sipping champagne, he felt a smug sense of accomplishment. It was all a game, and he was winning. But as he returned to his penthouse apartment, the sterile silence felt different tonight. He flicked on the large screen television, expecting to see his own triumphant face on the late-night news, recapping the glitzy charity event. Instead, a different face filled the screen. It was Sarah's. Her eyes, filled with a quiet dignity, looked directly into the camera, into the living rooms of millions. A reporter's voiceover began. Tonight, we bring you the story of Sarah, a woman whose life took an unexpected turn, and whose quiet struggle highlights a crisis hiding in plain sight. Artur Fruse. The remote control slipping from his grasp. The news segment began to unravel Sarah's story. They showed pictures of her in her crisp nurse's uniform, smiling warmly. They interviewed her former colleagues who spoke of her dedication and compassion. They explained how a sudden, aggressive illness had not only taken her health, but had also plunged her into a vortex of debt. She had lost everything, not through fault or failure, but through sheer bad luck. She wasn't a statistic. She was a person, a neighbor, a mother fighting for her children. Then, this story took a turn Arthur never expected. A hidden camera, part of the news crew's investigative report on urban poverty, had been rolling that afternoon. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. It showed his Maybach, his dismissive wave, and Sarah's hopeful face falling as his car drove away. The reporter's voice was calm, factual, but every word was a hammer blow to Arthur's carefully constructed image. We witnessed Ms. Jenkins ask for help from one of the city's wealthiest men, Arthur Blackwood, who was on his way to a charity gala. Refused. The screen split, showing Arthur's polished speech about giving back on one side, and the raw footage of his cold dismissal on the other. The contrast was brutal, a public dissection of his hypocrisy. His phone began to ring, then buzz, an incessant storm of notifications, texts, emails, missed calls from his board members, his PR team, his so-called friends. The world he had so meticulously built was crumbling around him. Live on national television. He sank into his expensive sofa, the fabric feeling coarse and foreign. The man on the screen, the one delivering platitudes about charity, seemed like a stranger. For the first time, Arthur saw himself not as the powerful billionaire, but through Sarah's eyes. He saw a man so insulated by wealth that he had lost his connection to humanity. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on him, suffocating him. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was fundamentally shaken. The news report wasn't an attack, it was a mirror, and the reflection it showed was ugly. The next morning, the city was abuzz. Blackwood's billions versus A mother's plea screamed to the headlines. His company's stock was plummeting. The board called an emergency meeting. Arthur walked into the boardroom not as a king, but as a defendant. The faces that usually greeted him with respect now held a mixture of anger and disappointment. They didn't care about his shame. They cared about the bottom line. "Fix this, Arthur," was the cold, unanimous command. But how? A simple donation now would look like a desperate, insincere attempt at damage control. He knew he had to do something more. Something real. He spent the day in isolation, replaying the news report, replaying the moment at the intersection. He finally understood. This wasn't about saving his company or his reputation anymore. This was about saving himself, driven by a new, unfamiliar impulse. Arthur did something he hadn't done in years. He went out alone, without his driver or his entourage. He found the news station that had aired the story and asked to speak to the reporter. He didn't threaten or demand. He asked for help. He asked for Sarah's contact information. The reporter, surprised by his genuine humility, agreed. Finding Sarah wasn't easy. She wasn't on the same street corner. With a little help from a local shelter, the reporter pointed him to. He eventually found her in a small, crowded community kitchen, sharing a simple meal with her 2 young children. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wary. There was no anger, just a deep, weary caution. "Miss Jenkins," Arthur began, his voice unsteady. I'm so sorry." He didn't offer excuses. He didn't talk about his bad day or his busy schedule. He just apologized. He told her he had been blind, arrogant, and that what he did was inexcusable. He looked at her children, who were watching him with wide, curious eyes, and he felt the full weight of his failure not just as a philanthropist, but as a human being. Sarah listened silently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she simply nodded. "Thank you for saying that," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It takes a lot to admit when you're wrong." That conversation was the beginning. Arthur didn't just write a check. He established a foundation, and he asked Sarah to be on its board. He wanted her voice, her experience, to guide its mission. The foundation wasn't named after him. It was named the Jenkins Initiative, dedicated to providing immediate, no questions asked, aid to families on the brink of homelessness due to medical debt. He didn't just fund it, he was involved, personally. He spent time at shelters, listening to stories, learning names, seeing faces. The public's perception of him began to shift, slowly. The initial outrage was replaced by a grudging respect. They saw a man not just fixing a PR disaster, but undergoing a genuine transformation. He sold his penthouse and moved into a more modest home. He used his business acumen, not just to make money, but to create sustainable programs that offered job training, housing assistance, and healthcare support. One evening, about a year later, Arthur was working late at the foundation's office. A news alert popped up on his computer. It was a follow-up story on the Jenkins Initiative. It featured an interview with Sarah, who now looked healthy and confident. She spoke about the hundreds of families the foundation had helped. She wasn't just a recipient of charity anymore. She was a leader, an agent of change. The report ended with a brief clip of Arthur, not in a suit, but in a simple polo shirt, helping unload boxers of food at a local shelter. The reporter's closing line was, "It seems Arthur Blackwood, the billionaire who once couldn't see the person in front of him, is now helping build a city where no one is left unseen." Arthur closed his laptop and looked out the window at the city lights. They didn't look like distant, cold stars anymore. They looked like a community, a home. He had lost a fortune in stock value that week, but he had gained something far more valuable. He had found his humanity, all because one woman on a street corner had the courage to ask for help, and the world had the wisdom to listen. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more. We'll see you in the next one.